Welcome to Sexuality and Truth with Phil Lees, the podcast where we uncover the realities of youth, sex, and the impact of cultural norms. Join us as we explore the facts, the risks, and the truth that every parent and young person should know. Now let's get into today's episode.
The statistics around teen sexuality in Canada reveal something shocking. Young people between 15 and 24 make up just 12% of the population, but account for half of all STI cases. Today we're exploring why early sexual activity carries far more risks than most people realize.
Well, that's a startling opener. And what's particularly concerning is how these health risks are just the beginning of a much larger pattern of challenges these young people face.
Exactly. You know, when we look at the comprehensive data from the Public Health Agency of Canada, we're seeing impacts that affect literally every aspect of a teenager's life, from their mental health to their academic future.
The mental health statistics really caught my attention. Could you break down what researchers are seeing in terms of depression and anxiety rates?
Well, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, sexually active teenage girls are 27% more likely to develop depressive symptoms. And here's what's really concerning. The suicide attempt rates show sexually active teens are 3 to 7 times more likely to attempt suicide compared to their peers.
That's absolutely devastating. And it seems to connect with the data showing that 75% of surveyed teens wish they had waited longer before becoming sexually active.
Right. And that regret often stems from feeling unprepared for the emotional complexity. The Canadian Psychological Association found that 60% of sexually active teens report lower frustration tolerance and an increased need for immediate gratification.
You know what's interesting about that? It ties directly into what we're seeing with relationship stability. The data shows these teens are more likely to experience toxic relationships and trust issues.
Exactly. And speaking of relationships, the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality found that 65% of sexually active teenagers report increased insecurity and jealousy. These aren't just temporary teenage drama. These patterns often continue well into adulthood.
The academic impact is equally concerning, especially that statistic about 45% of teenage mothers dropping out before graduation.
And that's where we see this domino effect in action. Lower educational attainment leads to reduced career opportunities, which can impact economic stability for years to come. The National Bureau of Economic Research Canada has found clear correlations between early sexual activity and lower academic performance overall.
Well, that makes sense when you consider the emotional energy these situations demand. It must be incredibly difficult to focus on studies while dealing with such intense personal issues.
You know what's particularly troubling? The exploitation risks. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection reports that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys experience some form of sexual abuse. And early sexual activity often increases their vulnerability to these situations.
The human trafficking statistics are especially alarming. 93% of victims being Canadian-born, with many being teenage girls who were initially involved in consensual sexual activity.
And here's where social media comes into play. The increased accessibility of explicit content and the normalization of certain behaviors are creating new challenges we haven't had to deal with before.
The way this connects to our increasingly digital world is fascinating and concerning. We're seeing more evidence of how online hypersexualization contributes to anxiety and depression among youth.
Speaking of digital influence, the Canadian Centre for Adolescence found that exposure to explicit content online is creating unrealistic expectations about relationships and intimacy. This directly impacts how teens approach their first sexual experiences.
So what you're saying is we're dealing with a perfect storm of factors. Physical risks, emotional vulnerability, and digital pressure all converging at once.
Precisely. And what's interesting is that successful intervention programs often involve multiple stakeholders, parents educators, healthcare providers, and community leaders all working together to address these various aspects.
The economic implications of all this must be significant when you consider the healthcare costs and social services required.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at increased healthcare expenses, mental health support services, and educational intervention programs. It's a substantial societal cost that affects entire communities.
Well, these findings certainly challenge the narrative that early sexual activity is just a normal part of growing up.
That's really the key point here. The evidence shows it's not just about physical health risks. We're talking about a complex web of challenges that can affect a young person's entire life trajectory. The data makes it clear supporting our youth in making informed decisions about sexual activity isn't just about morality. It's about protecting their future opportunities and well-being.
Let's hope this information helps communities better understand and address these challenges. The more we know, the better equipped we are to support our young people.
That's it for today's episode of Sexuality and Truth with Phil Lees. We hope this discussion has given you valuable insights into the risks and realities of youth sexuality. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to share it with parents, educators, and young people who need to hear this message. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all major streaming platforms. For more resources and upcoming events, visit https://peaceontario.com, podcast Sexuality and Truth with Phil Lees. Until next time, stay informed, stay strong, and always seek the truth.